Hey guys, it's Katie from OK You Guys. Let's get right into it. It is Friday, which means you guys know what's coming, some tea. Today, we really need to talk about the Duggars. Yesterday, I dove into Josiah and Lauren Duggar's arranged marriage and how things might be on the verge of imploding. And honestly, it begs the question, why did Jim Bob set it up to begin with? From what we've seen, Josiah had a bit of a wild streak where he didn't always listen to his dad. This whole marriage seems like an attempt by Jim Bob to tame those wild ways. This isn't exactly new territory for Jim Bob. He's known to set up marriages in the family. Remember Josh and Anna? The whole drama with Josh and his sisters? Jim Bob set them up after that, trying to keep Josh in line, so to say. It didn't exactly work, or so we see. We all know what happened in 2015 with Ashley Madison. And there's even speculation that Joseph and Kendra were matched up for similar reasons. Joseph had some, let's say, unpredictable tendencies, and now it seems like Josiah follows suit. Jim Bob was also in a rush for his daughters to get married, especially those that were connected to some of the drama with Josh. These girls had some say in who they married, but not a lot. Some, on the other hand, completely went their own way. Ginger comes to mind. If you're an OG fan of the family and grew up watching 19 Kids and Counting, then you likely remember Ginger as the rebel Duggar. And in many ways, that title fits. She's never done things exactly to the book, according to her parents. She's always been a bit more daring, more fashion-forward, and more in tune with the modern world. In fact, there was even a forum at one point a forum called Free Ginger, because so many people felt like she was being stifled by her parents. And you can sort of see why, because everything she did just seemed to be for a very, very specific mold that her parents wanted her to be. By this time, many people assumed Jill would be just like her parents. For a long time, she was the favorite daughter, the daughter who did what Jim Bob and Michelle wanted her to do. However, in a plot twist surprising to many, it is Jill who has become a bit of the rebel. She left the IBLP, married Derek, who ironically Jim Bob set her up with, and they have completely cut ties with the IBLP. They are putting their kids into public schools, he is in law school, and he is even in therapy to work through some of the challenges of growing up under the rigid rules put in place by Jim Bob and Michelle. Ginger has simply always done her own thing. Here's the way her story goes on. On her wedding day, Ginger was fully stepping into her own life. According to a source talking to Hollywood Gossip, which I've heard some from insiders too, so it lines up, here is the scoop. Ginger and Jeremy met through Ben Seawald. If you recall, Ben is Jess's husband. Anyhow, through that connection, Jeremy and Ginger met, and the sparks flew. They fell in love. The interesting thing, Jim Bob had almost nothing to do with it. This wasn't one of those arranged matches he had. He wasn't overseeing the courtship or orchestrating the relationship at all. It was completely Ginger's decision. So Ginger and Jeremy met, clicked, and wanted to court. Never mind the fact that they wanted to do things their way. But as one might expect, there was one major thing that instantly proved to be a big point of contention for Jim Bob: theology. Don't you worry, I'll keep this simplified so it's not overwhelming. Jim Bob and Michelle are essentially evangelical legalists. They intrinsically believe that the path to heaven was one of strict obedience to God, adherence to rules, and the performance of good works. To them, faith is not so much about a relationship with God, but about following the rules, checking the boxes, and proving oneself through actions. Jeremy is a Calvinist by contrast. That is, he believes in predestination, that God has already decided who to let into heaven and there's nothing you can do to change it. Living a moral life is rather more of a sign that you were predestined than it is a ticket to heaven. You can see how that's a major difference, and one that can get people heated. On one side, you've got legalists focused on rules and works. On the other, Calvinists focused on God's preordained plan. Apparently, both Jeremy and Ben, yes, Jess's husband, are Calvinists, and as you can imagine, this did not sit well with Jim Bob. He only found out about Ben's beliefs after the fact, and when he learned about Jeremy's, he wasn't thrilled either. Not a lot Jim Bob could do at that point, so Ginger and Jeremy went the whole 9 yards. Jim Bob had never exactly been a fan of Jeremy's, but reportedly accepted the relationship mainly because Ginger was just so determined to be with him. Compared to some other men Jim Bob has paired with his daughters, Jeremy is a bit less conservative. But even for being a Calvinist, he's still quite traditional in many ways. Jeremy would lean more to a modernistic way of life. He doesn't mind if women wear pants, have shorter hair, or enjoy some of the freedoms the world has offered them. His belief in predestination just doesn't allow these worldly things to be threatening to his faith. Still, he is a fairly conservative man when it comes to marriage and other points in life. So yes, theology was one hurdle, but there was another. Jeremy doesn't see women as needing to be completely submissive to their husbands. He's much more open to Ginger having a voice and making choices in their marriage. He isn't a legalist, he doesn't insist on rigid rules, and he certainly doesn't enforce the strict obedience that Jim Bob expects. Jim Bob had to navigate that. He found a sort of middle ground for Ginger's sake, but things got even more complicated after they married. Jeremy took a job and they moved to Laredo, Texas. That move stirred up some tension because it disrupted the whole courting structure Jim Bob preferred. The courting process for Jinger and Jeremy had been incredibly fast, and then came the big move to Texas. That's when Jim Bob realized he'd lost control. But even before the move, he confronted Jeremy about his beliefs. Jeremy didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, he was a Calvinist. Jim Bob was upset, sure, but it wasn't the theological difference that really got under his skin. The real problem? The move itself. Once they were in Texas, Jeremy pretty much took Jinger completely out of Jim Bob's reach. No longer did he control the purse strings, he couldn't control her thoughts or feelings, and she was suddenly introduced to the wider world. In Arkansas, Jim Bob and Michelle could monitor social media much more easily through Covenant Eyes, control which kids get how much money, and manage gifts instead of providing an income. Basically, there were plenty of ways to keep their children from the real world. But Jinger, she dove headfirst into lifestyle in Laredo, and into modern life itself. For Jim Bob, it was all downhill after they'd relocated to Texas, and things only heightened when the couple later opted to move to Los Angeles. Jeremy was a pastor in Laredo, then got an opportunity to attend seminary for the same church in Los Angeles, so off they went to California. And at this point, sources close to the Duggar family say, Jim Bob officially disowned them, completely cut them off. Jim Bob felt that by taking Jeremy to California, he had in effect stolen Jinger, and whisked her away to what was practically a land of heathens. According to sources, many people in ultra-conservative circles are overwhelmingly leery of California. The progressive lifestyles, open and accepting attitude of all different kinds of people, religions, non-religious, and members of the LGBTQ+ community is really something entirely opposite of the worldview Jim Bob and Michelle live and preach. So in their minds, Jinger had stepped into a no-man's land, a non-Christian world. Initially, Jim Bob fully disowned her. However, then some insiders within their circle in Arkansas began to give him a dose of reality. They were telling him, look, disowning Jinger either over moving to California or marrying a Calvinist is not going to look good. It wasn't a matter of wanting Jinger back. It was about appearances, the way the family would look before the community. According to sources, someone in the community, though it's unclear exactly who, warned Jim Bob that if he continued down this path, it would make him look bad. Of course, Jim Bob initially resisted. He argued, insisting that Jeremy was a Calvinist and that he had taken his daughter. But in the end, eventually, Jim Bob and Michelle repented and apologized to Jinger. Sources indicate that the family made amends with her after returning to California. She came out of the conflict with her parents as the clear victor. No longer disowned, she was welcomed back into the family and to a certain extent accepted. The source said, and I completely agree, Jinger and Jeremy aren't doing anything wrong. They aren't living wild lives or breaking rules in ways that should justify being disowned. What has she really done? She cut her hair, dyed it blonde, wears shorts, wears pants. Basically, she's living a normal life in the real world. And the truth is, Jim Bob simply couldn't handle that. It's interesting to compare with Jill. She's also in the real world and has been somewhat disowned, but she's still in Arkansas. The funny thing is, Jinger has always shown a certain level of respect for her parents, whereas Jill doesn't even try to conform anymore. For example, when Jill went out to lunch with her sisters, she was wearing jeans with holes in the knees and looked like any modern young woman. Jill keeps her makeup minimal, doesn't dye her hair much, and although she recently cut off a big chunk of it, around 12 or 14 inches, she still keeps it fairly long. Jinger, on the other hand, has embraced a modern life even more fully. She took her freedom and ran with it, showing you can respect your family while still living life on your own terms. I'd also say that Jinger has become more progressive in how she presents herself, modernizing her look and really embracing fashion in a way that feels very her. Now, a little honesty here. I've been critical of Jeremy at times because he can come across as a bit arrogant or controlling. In actuality, it's really a good thing that he doesn't hang on to some of the beliefs of Jim Bob. One of the major issues with the IBLP is the concept of women always having to be subservient to men. Based on this philosophy, a wife is supposed to be joyfully available to her husband at all times, regardless of how she feels. Take, for example, the teachings of Bill Gothard. They tend to be quite radical. They say women have to submit themselves to their husbands in all aspects, including intimacy, even if they are sick or on their time of the month. Michelle Duggar has repeated this advice to her daughters. Consent, in that sense, does not really exist within marriage in that schema. It is all about the husband's rights. That is not a belief system Jeremy follows, and Jinger has since stepped away from. She truly now founded her view on one simple fact. A woman has rights to her own body and choices. She's literally stamping the fact that consent, respect, and personal agency will play, and that's a huge leap from where she grew up. Jinger has also clearly wrapped her head around the fact that she can make her own choices, such as saying, I don't have to do this with you. I don't have to participate if I don't want to. That could also explain a little why she and Jeremy haven't had another child yet. There are still a ton of rumors milling around that Jinger is pregnant. I'll be honest, I don't like to speculate, and I avoided it when those rumors swirled around Joy until it was obvious. With Jinger, I haven't seen any indication that she is pregnant. Of course, everybody wants her to have another baby, but I wouldn't anticipate that Jinger and Jeremy would have anywhere near as big of a family as Jim Bob and Michelle. Jeremy's just from a smaller family in general, just a few siblings, not dozens. The same goes for Jill and Derek. Maybe they could have one more child, but not likely any more than that. Of the sisters-in-law, if anyone seems likely to continue the Duggar tradition of having a lot of kids, it would probably be Kendra and Jessa. I don't see Abby and David having a huge family either. Abby works as a nurse, she's nearly 30, and her lifestyle probably won't allow for a huge brood. Some of these children are clearly opting out of this, including practicing birth control. That is not a bad thing. It puts control back in the hands of the woman to decide when and if she wants to have a child. Without being expected to be joyfully available at any time, pregnancies would naturally happen less frequently. After all, it was a very controlled, almost cult-like environment in which they grew up. And anybody that I've spoken with who knows anything about this family knows that if you step out of that framework, you are going to make some very different choices about life, marriage, and family planning. Anyone familiar with this world seems to say the same thing. It's a cult. Bill Gothard's track record is shady at best, and Jim Bob and Michelle certainly aren't known to keep under wraps the fact that they exert an extreme level of control over their children. But Jinger, that's the rebel who got out. She's living in the modern world, but she's still married to a reformist, so there is a conservative element in her life. Still, we must applaud that she did do things her own way. The courtship wasn't through Dad, the marriage wasn't through Dad. She married who she wanted to marry, and she's in the place she wants to be, and doing what she wants to be doing. For that, I say, go Jinger.